Hello and welcome to the Ourdadsstamps YouTube channel, where we talk about all things related to stamps and stamp collecting. My name's Spink West and I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please click on the like button and don't forget to subscribe to get regular updates on new content. Hello again and welcome to Ourdadsstamps video. My name's Pete West and once again we have with us Sheila.
Hi everybody!
And for today's video I thought I would talk about the auction houses. I'm not talking about eBay or Delcamp Hipstamp. I mean the international professional auction houses, and just see what's going on in the auction houses and see what's happening, get a general feel for the stamp world. What I've done, I've looked at 4 of the major auction places and just picked out a few things from it to talk about and see how it's going. I should say at this stage that I have no affiliation with any of these auction houses. They were chosen purely on me having heard of them more than anything else. But if any of them want to send me any free gifts for mentioning them in my video, then I would be more than happy.
I love that little bit of, we won't say publicity, but a name dropping.
Bit of optimism. I can't see it happening, but you never know. Anyway, I'm going to start with an auction house called Corinphila, which is based in Zurich, apparently, and it's been going for over 100 years now, and is well known throughout the stamping world. And when you look at these auction houses, they often advertise their big sellers and tell you what's made the most money and what's been really successful. They don't always tell you what's been not quite so successful. So I thought I'd try and look at a bit of both.
So these are auction houses that purely specialise in stamps, not in everything.
Actually, a couple of them I've chosen do sell other things as well, but the auctions I'm going to talk about are just stamp auctions. One of the things that attracted me to the Corinphila auction house was that they actually sold one of the stamps that was in one of my earlier videos about the first stamps ever produced. And this was, they sold some Zurich Canton stamps, which were produced in, they were actually originally produced in 1843, but the ones they sold were 1862 reprints. However, they still made a huge amount of money. They sold for around 60,000 Swiss francs, which is about £55,000.
What is that, one stamp?
One pair of stamps.
Okay.
Yeah. But these are quite rare stamps. In fact, it's a pair, and it's the only known pair of them together. So it's not surprising it went for a fair amount of money.
So when you say a pair of stamps, do you mean 2 stamps of the same value?
This particular one actually are not. Normally they are. Normally they're 2 identical stamps that are together. This was actually a 4R, and I have to say I'm not quite sure what the R stands for, and a 6R together side by side with a gap in between that's known as a gutter margin.
And presumably in mint condition? In
mint condition, never been used, yeah. As I said, it's quite a rarity, but £55,000 is not bad afternoon's work if you happen to own one of those. The other one that I found interesting was that they sold 2 penny blacks, again a pair of penny blacks together, but with the initials VR in the top corners. Now for those of you that don't know, VR were printed as official stamps to be used by Inland Revenue or for official purposes, government purposes. And they printed off 3,300 sheets of this stamp, of this penny black stamp, with the initials VR along the top, and then changed their mind and destroyed the lot.
Or at least they thought they had.
Which was very clever of some. In actual fact, 21 sheets were left over somehow or another, whether they were deliberately not destroyed or whether accidentally or even accidentally on purpose. But apparently there was 21 surviving sheets, and some of them were distributed to postmasters so that they knew what the stamp looked like, which was a standard practice in those days. And others have just fallen into the hands of dealers. And in fact, there are a few used examples. Rowland Hill was trying to experiment with different postmarks to see which ones were more permanent than others, and he used some of these stamps. But they are very rare stamps and very difficult to get hold of, and surprisingly only sold for 18,000 Swiss francs, which is about £16,000. Now, if you look into Stanley Gibbons' specialist catalogue, the value for a pair of these is £90,000.
Yeah, but that would be mint, wouldn't it?
Well, this is mint as well.
Oh, they are mint.
In the same condition, Stanley Gibbons' catalogue value is £90,000, but they only sold for £16,000. So yes, we all know that you're unlikely to get catalogue value on stamps, but that's a big difference, and I was quite surprised to see that. What I then did was, because it's impossible to go through all their sales, they sold several thousand lots, different lots. But I picked out one stamp and just had a look at what that one particular stamp was going for, and whether there was a general trend that they all sold or they didn't sell. And I looked at the Tuppenny Blues in this particular auction house. Some of the things were quite successful, some of them were not quite successful. Again, there was a strip of 4 Tuppenny Blues together, in this case used, and they'd gone through the post office with all 4 of them together intact. It had a starting price of 1,000 Swiss francs, and it actually ended up selling for 3,600 Swiss francs, which again is it's not far off £3,500. For this particular one, the catalogue value is £4,000, so that one almost made catalogue value. And this was the bit I was interested in, is some of them seem to make catalogue value, some of them make nowhere near catalogue value, and in some cases some of them don't sell at all. There doesn't seem any rhyme or reason why. It's just obviously what somebody wants and what somebody doesn't want.
I mean, it sounds a bit just like a football match. I mean, you can do all the preparation and what you think is going to happen, but at the end it depends on what happens on the day. Yes, yeah, that's right. It does. Entirely what happens on the day. There was another one which was just an ordinary, well, not an ordinary, but it was a Tuppenny Blue, which was on piece. And what that means is it's been cut out from the original envelope, but the postmark is still intact, and the paper that the postmark on is still intact. And one of those with a really clear circular date stamp, which is quite unusual in those days, and the Maltese cross. It had a starting price at 350 Swiss francs, and eventually made 1,700 Swiss francs, which is about £1,500. Now, the catalogue value of that is only 975. So that made a lot more than catalogue price. I mean, you have to ask the question, when someone like Sotheby's create these catalogues, what information do they use, what parameters, to come to these figures?
Yeah, very true. I must admit, when I was looking through, some of the different auction houses do it different ways, but some of them have a starting price, some of them have an estimated value, and they only sell at a certain percentage of the estimated value. And some of those figures seem quite random. You know, it didn't follow Stanley Gibbons' catalogue. Maybe they have their own catalogue. And as you say, it's difficult to actually put a price on it because it depends what happens on the day. I
mean, I guess all you can really work on is how many of these stamps you believe are actually out there. And I'm not actually sure how you would know that. So is it a very rare stamp, or is it everyone's going to have one? And the quality, presumably, the quality of the stamp.
Makes a huge difference, especially with the old Victorian stamps.
And then something like, is the postmark legible? Is there any history? Is there an envelope attached to it? That type of thing, I guess, can affect the value.
Yeah.
But yes, it would be interesting to see what the parameters are for them putting these guideline prices or estimated prices in the catalogue.
Yes. And talking about having an envelope attached, if we look at the next auction house I looked at, David Feldman Auctions, again, they're based in Geneva and have been around for 50 years auctioning stamps. They had a couple of British Guiana lots. And one of those was a cover, which, if you can remember the 1 cent magenta that we talked about.
Stuart Wiseman?
That's right, yep. This was actually the 4 cent blue, Like the 1 cent magenta, it's the actual image is in black, but this one was on blue paper, the 1 cent is on magenta paper. And this was on a cover, complete, believed to be the only one in existence, and has a catalogue value of £150,000. And it actually sold for £120,000. So that wasn't far off the catalogue value. And it meant someone went out that day and just sort of wrote a cheque for the £120,000 and came home with a single envelope.
See, what would be interesting is to actually know the history of a stamp. You know, we speak to somebody at the auction who bought this stamp in to be sold, or how they came across it and bought it themselves, and follow the history of a stamp.
You can find that generally about the famous ones, like the 1 cent magenta. A lot of people like anonymity with this and don't really want their collection to be, or the fact that they have these in their collection to be publicised. So.
Yeah, but you wouldn't mention their names, but it would be, okay, this stamp comes from here. Yeah. It was then sold to person A in 19 whatever. Person A sold it to person B.
I'm sure given time we could find that about a lot of the famous stamps. We certainly talked about it with the inverted Jenny as well, where there was a definite history to follow. But I must admit, on this particular one, I didn't look much further. But interesting. And there was an American stamp, which, talking about the inverted Jenny, there was a 2 cent black and red Pan American exhibition stamp where the centre is inverted. And I can't find the catalogue price for this because I don't have specialist American catalogues. But the estimate was between 30 and 40,000, and it sold for 42,000. It does show what I believe is a general trend that unusual stamps with errors on them, where they're different from the rest of that particular issue, seem to be getting very popular and seem to be selling for a lot more than just a standard issue. An interesting one with Feldman's, again, I picked out one particular stamp, the 1915 British Great Britain seahorses. Now, I think these stamps are probably the nicest stamps ever printed. They are really, really detailed in their engraving, and it's just a really nice looking stamp. Many of you will probably know there were several different printings, and depending on the printing depends on the value of the stamp. The first ones were printed in 1913 by Waterlow and Sons. Then De La Rue printed some, and then Bradbury Wilkinson in 1918. And were then reprinted again by Waterlow in 1934. But a quick look through, some of them sold, some of them didn't sell. And if we pick out a few examples of the ones that sold, there was a block of 4 of the 10 shilling blue, printed by De La Rue in 1915. They were estimated to sell at £10,000. And as we said, I'm not sure where they get their figures from, because the estimate was 10,000. It was a block of 4, and the Stanley Gibbons catalogue price is £11,000 each. So why they estimated the block of 4 would only sell for 10,000, I'm not quite sure, but they were right in their estimate, because in the end it only sold for £8,500. So that was really surprising. And yet, in a similar vein, the 2 and 6pence, the very pale sepia brand, sometimes known as chrome, again, it was a block of 4, and they were estimated to sell for £8,000, which is 4 times the catalogue value. They're valued at £2,000 each. Estimate 8,000, that makes sense to me. But it actually sold for a lot more than the estimate, and it sold for £12,000. So why that one sold for a lot more and the 10 shilling didn't sell for a lot more? Because to me, the 10 shilling is a nicer stamp. But there we go. Obviously, somebody wanted that one more than they wanted the 10 shilling.
I guess it's like anything, isn't it? As much as they can put, okay, this is what we believe is the estimated price or the valuation, it's what someone's prepared to pay for it, what happens on the day, maybe someone gets a bit carried away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting.
Yes, it is. And I was able to get a lot more information from Feldman's, actually, and just on their seahorse stamps, again, it was impossible to go through the whole lot because there was thousands upon thousands of sales. But on their seahorse stamps, there were 52 different lots of this particular stamp for sale. 5 of them sold at the estimate that Feldman's put, so they got what they expected to get for them. 3 of them sold above the estimate that they expected. 4 of them sold below the estimate that they expected. And 40 of them didn't sell at all. Now, the ones that didn't sell probably means that they didn't reach the estimate, therefore they wouldn't sell them at a low amount. Or nobody bid on them at all, I'm not quite sure. But it's quite significant that 40 out of 52 didn't sell at all.
But these were all identical stamps?
Well, from the same set, from the seahorse set.
So the same stamp but with different price values on...
Yeah, like
printed on the stamp.
Different shades of the stamp or different denominations.
Okay.
Maybe some were used, some of them were mint, but it was all from the same set. And as I said, some of them were obviously very popular and sold for more than their estimate, but an awful lot of them didn't sell at all. So I thought that was quite interesting. And it just shows you that if you're in the stamp world to make money, which we're not, most of us are here for the enjoyment of it, but if you're trying to make money from this, then you're only going to make money if someone buys them in the first place, and then if they buy them for the money you want them to buy them for. So it does sort of highlight that it's not always that easy to sell a stamp, even if it's a really interesting and a really fantastic stamp.
So that brings us to the question of buying and selling stamps as an investment.
Yeah.
Where do you put your money these days if you're trying to look for guaranteed income, or you're just hoping that if you hold them for a long period of time that they will go up in value?
I would say that anybody with any sense wouldn't buy stamps as an investment. It's not a thing you can guarantee will go up. And as we've just seen, it's not a thing you can guarantee you can get rid of either. The only people that might consider it are the people that can afford the really, really top value stamps, the 1 cent magentas, the inverted jennies, which are always going to be in demand. But in general, other stamps, it depends if the right person is there. And when you want to sell it, you need to find that right person, and he may not be in a position to buy at that point.
But it's interesting talking about what's happened on some of the, not these particular, but some of the stamps you've covered so far. Some have gone way above, some have gone just about right, and some have gone a lot less.
Quite a lot less, yeah. So you can never guarantee what you're going to get for them. Just a quick look at a couple more, and to highlight my point on what I believe is that the unusual and different stamps are the ones that are selling for a lot. Looking at Spink auctions. Spink's have been in an auction house apparently since 1666 in London. Now, obviously they haven't been sending stamps since then, but they've been auctioning things and are a very well-known auction house amongst the stamp world. In their recent auction, there's just 2 things I wanted to pick up. As a lot of you may know, the penny blacks and penny reds initially were in perfora, and the clerk at the post office had to cut them out with a pair of scissors. And this was time-consuming, often meant stamps were cut in half because they were careless or even couldn't see in the dim light of a candle-lit post office. So there are a lot of trials that went on to try and find a way of separating stamps before they come up with the current method of perforations. And there were a couple of roulettes, roulette is basically like if you imagine a pizza cutter, but there's odd bits along it where it doesn't cut. So you roll that along a stamp and it makes a gap in a bit and then leaves a bit that's not a gap, then it puts a gap in another bit. They tried some of those. They also tried them where it went in and out rather than in a straight line, but a similar idea. And there were 2 lots of these roulettes up for sale at Spink's. And it's much better to have them in a pair because you can see how they fitted together originally as well as what happened when they came apart. And these were a pair of penny reds with a treasury roulette. It started at £1,900 and actually sold for £4,500. And the other type of roulette, where it's a wavy line, started at £4,000 and it sold eventually for £10,000. So both of those were obviously sought after stamps that people were fighting over because the bids went quite a long way. So it does show that some stamps are still very popular and in demand. You just have to choose the right ones.
And that's where the crystal ball comes in.
And that's where your crystal ball comes in, yeah. And one last one, and again, just to highlight my point with the Stanley Gibbons auction, There's a Ceylon 1938 King George VI pictorial, 5 cent, with an inverted watermark. So again, it's not the standard 5 cent, which is not worth an awful lot. This one's got an inverted watermark. And they actually said on the description in the auction house, it's currently unlisted because Stanley Gibbons have never seen one before. But having sold this one, it will be listed in the 2024 catalogue. I'm not quite sure what price they're going to put on it, because they estimated it to sell between £1,500 and £2,000, and it actually sold for £3,200. I should certainly have a look at that when I buy the catalogue next year to see what they've listed it as. But as I said again, it's the different and the unusual that seem to be selling. Everything else hit and miss, but those are certainly worth a look at.
So if we talk about catalogues for a moment, so would Stanley Gibbons issue a new catalogue annually?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
They have hundreds of different catalogues, but the British Commonwealth Specialist Catalogue they issue every year. The whole world catalogues they issue every year, and some of the other ones they issue every year. Others maybe every 2 or 3 years, but certainly that one is every year. So that was just a little roundup of the auction houses. I thought it'd be quite interesting. I hope you found it interesting. And as we said before, it highlights the fact that if you're in this wonderful hobby for making money, then maybe it's not quite such a good idea. However, if you're in it for the sheer enjoyment of looking at lovely pieces of art and little pieces, squares of paper, then it's the place to be. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again in another couple of weeks. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Don't forget you can visit my online stores at eBay and Delcamp under the name of Ourdadsstamps, where I have over 2,000 items for sale. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Ourdadsstamps podcast.